Hello, and thank you for inviting me to come and talk about my story. I was a bit confused as to where to start, really, and I thought I'll have to edit a lot of it out because I'm quite old, really. But in relation to games, I suppose, which is very relevant to Women in Games conferences, I first got into making games properly at the Women Only Game Jam that was funded by Refig, who are a Canadian bunch of people. And it was run in London at Mind Candy headquarters, and it was my first experience of a game jam, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was really good fun. I went along thinking, I don't know anything about games. I don't play games because I have an addictive personality and I'd play them all the time and never do any housework. And so I went along to this thing, and I ended up doing the artwork, sort of pixel type artwork for a game with two women who I'd never met before, who were really, really nice. And we made our game and got a special mention. And it really fired me up to actually do more of the same, because my background's in creative technology. But before that, I did a degree in fine art, and then I did a master's and PhD in IT and information systems and things. And for me, games is a brilliant way to pull all those different strands together and actually have fun doing it with quite an interesting bunch of people. So that was back in 2012. And then in 2014, I did a writing for games course at Arvon alongside 10 guys and Shella Ramanan, who some of you might know, who's now a full-time games writer. And yeah, I just really got into games jams and going to global games jams in Bristol, and also Fuse Jam, which is where Kissy was born. So Kissy is my first, well, it was a game jam game, but it's the first time I've tried to do something that's actually commercial. So I have, if fingers crossed and the gods of tech are working, I am now going to attempt to share my screen and see if I can get it to go to the right Chrome tab and play the video. So yeah, so if you can see that, I'm going to play it.
Kissy is a game for all the family, from 4-year-olds to 4 and 10 and beyond. This quirky two-player game will get you giggling and get you thinking. I'm Constance Fleuriot, and I'm a writer, game designer, and founder of Kissy Digital. I want to talk to you about Kissy, a fun, positive game inspired by my grandchildren who love to run away when I want to hug them. Kissy is a game for 2 players who each control one of 2 little characters, Tiger and Bee. They like to build safe spaces to hide away from grandparents intent on kissing them, something that most of us can relate to. All Tiger and Bee want to do is play their games together, always dressed in their character onesie. It's a 2-player game on Mac or PC for children to play with friends and family that starts with Tiger and Bee running around their playmat, building a pillow fort to hide in with Teddy. As the game progresses, they explore different places, the beach, the park, and so on, amassing jelly bean fortunes to buy more onesies and to customize their outfits and their grandparents, and always building den. Kissy is deliberately designed to be a collaborative and enjoyable game that encourages players to communicate and work together as a team. We've made sure that less dexterous players can join in without it affecting the success of the fort-building missions, offering a gameplay version where Tiger and Bee can be made unphysical. This makes it easier for smaller children to play with older siblings, as well as for players with less hand mobility, without being blamed for losing the game. Tiger and Bee still have to work together but can't be caught by the grandparents. Kissy also has a serious underlying message about listening to children and allowing them to decide whether they want to be kissed, that it's okay to run away and be in charge of your own body. It is a game that sees things from a child's perspective and rewards cooperative play. You have to work together in each level. Players have to cooperate and communicate to succeed. I have released level 1 on itch during this lockdown to spread a little joy, with a game that children can play with their parents and hopefully remind them that they have grandparents out there who can't wait to see them. Kissy Digital was supported by the UK Games Fund to develop the demo of Kissy. It was play-tested extensively and has been well received wherever we have shown it, from game developers at EGX to 2 full-on days of playtesting with families at Kidtropolis in Manchester, where it was a definite hit, and we discovered that even 4-year-olds could grasp the concept and control the gameplay. The visual style and quick-to-learn mechanics in Kissy can be played by anyone, and it is not restricted to English speakers. There is very little text to read. Come and play with Tiger and Bee.
So did that work? Yay. Okay. So I have some slides as well. So basically, if I can get this to work. Yeah, so the game, Kissy Kissy Game, it was actually based, I mean, people think this is just a marketing ploy, but it was actually based on my twins, who are the two guides that you saw wearing their tiger skins, as it were. And it was based on the idea that they do actually run away from me. And I wanted to sort of try, so when I first started making the game, it was just a fun thing for kids for anyone to play, really. It wasn't just for children. But as it sort of developed, it became more of a, oh, this is something that really you need to decide who your audience is. You know, when you start trying to take these things out into the real world, basically the feedback is you need to know who you're marketing it to. So I'm not allowed to say I'm marketing it to anyone, but I have had people of all ages playing different versions of it. One of the things I want to get across is that deliberately wanted to make it a gender neutral game because I wanted a game that boys and girls would equally feel at home playing. And also I am a great believer in children being brought up in gender neutral ways. I mean, I have sons and daughters, and I know it's very hard, but you try as much as you can to try and make childhood a childhood for them, where they don't have to think about, you know, how they look or whatever. I mean, most children basically would like to just go out and get muddy and wear onesies all the time if they're anything like my grandchildren. The other thing that we were trying to do, so the original characters were a tiger and a bear, because we realized if there's two of you playing, you don't know which one's your tiger. It can get very confusing. And the other thing that I was trying to do as well is looking at so the original one, you can see bear there on the screen, but the original wanted to change the characters to try and make them look sort of less white, I suppose. So even though my own grandsons are sort of were blonde-haired and blue-eyed at the time, I wanted to make sure that the characters sort of could be anyone, really. So that's something that we're looking at. And we don't have the resources to allow people to change the skin tone yet, because we haven't got the funds to develop the game further. So we're trying to make the characters appeal to as many people as possible. So with regard to the play testing, so this is my two grandsons, again, wearing tiger onesies. They weren't just wearing that for the photo, they wear those all the time. Trying to get them to do play testing, which was really useful. And they came up with all sorts of different ideas about the gameplay. They found the bugs and made a list of them for me. They really got into it. They're 11 now, so they were 10 when they were doing it. And they made lots of different suggestions about how the game could develop and what could be in the game. And I began to realize that so much of it is based on what they already know from things they're playing. So, you know, the thing of in-app purchases, which I vetoed because I knew that people like my daughter would be doesn't really like in-app purchases. And I also didn't think it's fair to create a game that's aimed at children where the parents accidentally end up buying all sorts of stuff. They're also used to playing games which are mostly about competing against each other or racing or being fast or all those sorts of things. And so I was trying to shift the expectations away in the game and actually reward cooperative and collaborative behavior. And there was a really good keynote at Women in Games conference a couple of years ago from Brie Code, where she was talking about Tend and Befriend and the sorts of games that encourage collaborative stuff. And I really want to focus on that sort of thing rather than games where you're competing against someone else, you know. And again, so people said, oh, why don't you have it so you can play as the grandparents? And I didn't want that either, because again, that would turn into a chase game where one of you is chasing the other and one of you wins and one of you loses. There was one thing I put in after watching an early version of them playing, where the two little characters, if they get kissed, then they basically sink to the ground and have a screaming tantrum, and the other character has to run past and touch them to free them, if you like, when they've been kissed. And one of my grandsons was not freeing his brother. So I had one child running around collecting things to build the den in the game, and the other one actually beginning to melt down in real life because his brother wasn't rescuing him. So we changed the actual game, so you have to rescue each other in order to succeed on each level. So the object of the game, like you saw, is like you're building a den, but at the end of that level, you both have to be in the den. So you both have to be free. So you can't leave your co-player stranded and having a tantrum. The other thing I wanted to show you, so again, they came to visit me for a weekend, and we were talking about onesies and what sorts of different onesies. And so they came up with all these different designs for me of the different sorts of onesies that you could maybe have in the game, which I loved, absolutely loved. Again, but you can see that on a lot of them, they've actually put the prices of the different onesies. So they were working out, you know, it'd be a penny for a jelly bean onesie and 99p to be an avocado. Lots of different designs. I also loved their spelling of how, you know, of how they, you know, they thought this would pan out. I've got a few of these actually, just because I love them so much. So the T-Wex onesie, the saxophone, the pencil. I mean, they got really creative. Again, I don't know how much they got from watching films and playing games themselves. A whole range of unicorn onesies, which are everywhere these days, crocodile onesies, and like the plain green one's $1.99, the purple one's $3.50, and he gets to wear sunglasses. So we talked again about the rewards in the game and what you might have to do to earn them. So they came up with one which was like, if you rescued your co-player X number of times, then you could have a paramedic onesie. And the idea was that you would build up all these onesies in your wardrobe, and you could earn them by collecting jelly beans as you were running around. One of the other things that I did is I took their drawings and I gave them to Harry, who is the artist who is working on the game, who's comes from an illustration background, and got him to take some of the kids' ideas and turn them into characters that, you know, if we get the funding and we can make the proper version of the game, you know, the big version of the game where you can customize your characters and you can choose which character you are, then these are the different sorts of onesies that you would be able to buy, if you like, or earn with having jelly beans. I mean, I didn't want to have coins that you collect as you run around. I thought jelly beans is it's a compromise. And when you get a certain level of jelly beans, then you can buy 2 onesies, one for each character. So it was great having Harry turn these into, and that's one of the things I'd like to do is take kids' art and turn it into ideas in the game, sort of building up, just because I like children being able to express what they like and then seeing it sort of polished, if you like, and getting that feeling of they have designed that. So we had this whole weekend of them working with me and making up games design. So this is just some of the children and adults who played at Kidtropolis. Again, one of the things I did there was for kids who were queuing up, we had a whole load of pens and pads so they could actually draw their own onesie designs. You can see my glamorous assistant Claire there, talking to a father and son there. So Claire Morwood, who is the coder who worked with me on this, who's absolutely brilliant. She also worked on Before I Forget with Shella. She was great. It was great working with her and Harry. So this is one of the children who was out there, and it was a boy, sort of 12-year-old boy, who drew a kangaroo onesie and said that perhaps in the game you could have the food that kangaroos eat, and you could leave it lying around in the game for them to eat, and that gives them different abilities, like they can jump faster or things like that. So again, for me, that was great, this idea that you're encouraging children to think about about game design, and how, you know, just trying to sort of say to them, this is a possible future, you know, you can do these things. It's easy to get started with game design. This was one of the games that my grandsons came up with during our weekend. We were talking about different games that could go together with what other games Tiger and Bee might be, and this idea that if you had a Tiger onesie in one game, then there might be other games you could play it in. And we came up with all sorts of different onesies. This is a zombie game. I have no idea what it's based on, but basically we came up with this whole idea of we were talking about sprouts and sweets. I didn't want to have sweets as a reward in the game because encouraging sweet eating, even though I have a sweet tooth myself. But one of them came up with this idea of sprout apocalypse. I love his spelling as well. And a complete design. So if you can see that there's sort of like, so basically we came up with the idea for a 2D side scroller about Brussels sprouts and zombies and humans, and if the human accidentally eats a Brussels sprout, then it farts and shoots off the screen. Sort of classic 10-year-old humour, which I quite enjoyed, really. It was very Beano-esque. But all this sort of talking to them about game designs led to this idea of a whole world of games with little characters in onesies. So onesie was the way that my grandson, one of my grandsons, was writing it when he was doing all the designs for me. And I was about to correct his spelling because I'm pedantic like that. And then I thought, oh, hang on a minute, that's actually a really nice spelling of onesie because it implies, you know, all sorts of things. But anyway, so Onesie World is this idea for a sort of like a platform or space where I can have lots of different family-friendly games. It's sort of like, I suppose, two of my inspirations are Beano and Sesame Street. You know, it's that sort of, it's funny, but it's safe and it's silly. But also it tries to encourage sort of cooperative, non-competitive stuff, but not in a virtuous way, really. One of the other pictures I wanted to share is these are my other grandsons, the little ones who have also, it's their first game that they've played was Kissy. And one, you can see the 5-year-old and you can just about see the 3-year-old, and they've been playing it together. And it's actually sparked them to do loads and loads of den building in real life. So they've been trashing the house, making dens, which I really love, is the idea that they've taken the game and then they're playing it in real life as well. They were also making their mum run around the trampoline shouting Kissy at them because they thought that was really funny. And so, yeah, so if you want to have a look at level 1, then it's on itch. So if you go to onesie-world.itch.io, then there is a 1-level version of the game that's free to download. You don't have to donate, you can ignore that button if you like. But it just gives you a flavour of what the game is like. And at the moment, I am trying to find more funding, which is one of the things that I find really tricky, because I don't come from a commercial games background. I don't come from a commercial background. I worked in creative tech research. Before that, I was a fine art student. Before that, I was in community organising and things like that. So, you know, running playgroups. So I'm not in that commercial mindset. So my funding, my sort of small bit of seed funding came from the UK Games Fund, which was great. They took a risk on me, even though I was very clear that I was not very good at the commercial side of things. But the brilliant thing about the UK Games Fund is I didn't have to find match funding. So I didn't have to have a bank account or anything like that. But one of the things I'm still trying to get to grips with is the idea that it seems to be that you can have a game and you can play it with loads of kids and they absolutely love it and their parents love it. But unless you know how to do your marketing and unless you know how to do your stats and your forecasting, it's not enough just to make a game that little kids like playing. You have to convince the funders and the publishers that you have a commercial hit, or you could have a commercial hit. And for me, I've applied to various different places. I've talked to a few publishers, and I sort of get that they all want a commercial thing. But I think for me, if you want to support women and marginalized groups, if you like, to get into making games, and they don't necessarily want to go and work in a big place, but they've got an idea and they want to develop it, then what they need is not just small pots of funding, but they need sort of really strong support to understand specific things like statistics and audiences and how you write the story of your future income. Because basically a lot of people have said, I've said, well, I don't know about how to do these numbers. It all feels very made up. And they say, yeah, well, everyone's making it up. And it's like, well, if everyone's making it up, why do we make it up? So it does feel as though we're trying to change things, but still using these same commercial models and criteria. So that's the thing that I'm grappling with now, is how to get to grips with business forecasting and spreadsheets and schedules and budgets and realistic budgets, because I need a team to work with to make this. I can't do it on my own, or if I could do a long, slow slog for it, but it'll probably take about 10 years. But the good things I've got is I was in the UK Game of the Show finals for the UK. The lovely family video game database, which is there to sort of give a review of all games for parents. The 1-level version of Kissy is on that. But again, it's like I'm stuck at this place where I've got to get my head around all the commercial side of things, it sort of makes me wonder what other games are out there that are really lovely and could potentially do really well, but are being missed out on because people are like me and they don't have this business head. You know, and then I look at the game that Claire and Shella did, Before I Forget, which has had great reviews and sort of critical, great feedback, but they also couldn't get funding because it wasn't seen as a commercial enough thing. So yeah, so the positive side is my grandkids love it, and I really need to find more money because they want more, because they've got access to the 3-level game and they want more. So I should probably stop talking. Yes.
Thank you, Constance. That was really interesting, fascinating insight. I loved how you're getting, you know, children into the design process as well and carrying their ideas through to the character design. So I found that quite fascinating. But I have a question actually, and it kind of picks up on some of the funding issues that you mentioned. So Angela's asking about, have you considered starting a Kickstarter campaign? You know, that might be an alternative way to fund this.
Yeah. I did do a crowdfunder in a couple of months ago, but I made a few mistakes. Well, I launched it just when everything seemed to explode online. So there were lots of really big political things going on, like Black Lives Matter. There was a whole explosion in the games industry about abusive behavior. And it just seemed a very hard time to try and, hey, look at my lovely game. It's like massive things going on around the world, you know, people being killed or people being abused. And it's like, I also, yeah, so I could have got £4,000 from it, but that wouldn't have been enough to do the things I said I was going to do in the campaign. So I just sort of left it and thought, I've got to go back to this. Okay, let's try pitching it thing. I mean, I might try and do a Kickstarter again when I've recovered from that, you know. And also because of lockdown, a lot of people weren't checking their LinkedIn messages or, you know, weren't checking their emails. People have been very busy. But since then but the thing about doing the crowdfunder is I didn't get the money, but it meant that the family video game database people put me on there because they saw it. You know, there were a couple of Yuki events that I went to during that time, which I've had interesting conversations with. Yeah. So yeah, and also I think I didn't do the game on I didn't do it on Kickstarter, which now I realise was a mistake because Kickstarter has people actually looking for games to support, whereas on crowdfunder it seemed to be more about all sorts of other different things, not necessarily so relevant. But yeah.
In terms then of the support from the Game Fund, do they give you some support in developing and doing your kind of audience insight plan? Is that a bit of a gap then?
They do tell you that that's what you have to do, and they do. But I think the other thing I was told was because my market was one that hadn't really, so it's like intergenerational, small children and grandparents. That was my preferred thing. Because to me, that was the main, you know, that was where I was coming from. And it's very hard to find statistics on that. So it's like, how do you, you know, I'm not from a business or marketing background. If I was, I'd probably know all sorts of different. So I started looking at different talks by people from places that do insights into kids or, but nobody seems to be looking at intergenerational stuff. Although I think it's just beginning to bubble up now. That whole idea of games aimed at a family. I mean, if I'd have made this an online remote playable game, it would have been brilliant during lockdown because I just said, hey, you know, can't see your grandkids, play this game with them online. It's like, so yeah, and at the moment it's still quite tiny. So yeah, so it's like deciding, well, at what point do I give up on trying to make it a bigger game and just, okay, this is a small game for now. And I'll just put it out there, you know, so there'll be no customization or anything like that, you know. But you can see from the map that we came up with the idea for like, you know, 12 different levels and what could happen in them. I took out all the really dark ones, like, you know, in the original Games Jam idea, it's like, oh, you could have an old people's home, you could have a hospital, you could have a cemetery, you could have a family funeral where you're, you know, and I just thought, well, maybe not. Maybe not if it's meant to be family friendly. you know, and I've had people, sort of games devs at EGX playing. We had a high score thing we put in for EGX, and I had people, you know, queuing up to play it and beat each other. And some people, you know, like there was a couple of teenage girls who came and played it for half an hour just to get the high score and thrash all these guys who were also on the UK Games Fund stand. So that was really funny. But I didn't want to keep a high score thing in the real game, because again, it's competitive and it does get people to do stuff. But I didn't want to put that pressure onto 4-year-olds, really.
Good point. The other thing I was wondering around, Constance, is I think there's many people that maybe want to go along to a games jam, but maybe feel a little bit intimidated that they maybe don't have the right skills or they can't program.
Yeah.
What words of encouragement would you give to people that are thinking, you know, of going along to game jams but don't?
Okay, so for me, I would say go with a friend, but you don't necessarily have to work with that friend. When I went to the refig, the XX one in 2012, I went with someone I worked with at UE. We were both working in the same creative tech research centre, and she had a degree in journalism. I had a degree in fine art, although it was quite a long time before. And we both went along thinking, oh, we don't really know anything, you know. But we were on different groups, but we both. You don't know what skills you've got until you meet people. I would say that women-only jams or more inclusive jams have a different atmosphere. It's not about trying to sort of create some all singing or dancing thing. To me, it's just about the idea, really. And I'm actually running a thing in the spring, hopefully, for an arts centre in Somerset called Clay Hill Arts, and they've asked me to do an introduction to game design. So it's for complete beginners. So it's people who don't even have to play games regularly or know anything about games, but it's just come along and have an idea. And so for me, it's that thing of any small idea can grow into something. So before I forget, for example, Shella and Claire's game, that happened at a games jam I ran for women, which was the refig one 3 years ago in Bristol. And one of the things I put into our games jam was have like a peer assessment, if you like, so like an audience award for the game I'd most like to see made. And so Shella had come along to that because I basically told her to, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know what I can, you know, what can I do?" And I was like, "You're a writer. You write about games all the time. You did a writing course for games. I know you know." And she came along, and she ended up working with Claire and someone else, and they came up with this whole idea with Before I Forget, which is now, you know, it's taken them 3 years of slog to get there in their spare time, but it's absolutely beautiful, thoughtful, thought-provoking game. So, and Shella wasn't going to come to that games jam until I pushed her. So if there aren't any women's ones in your area or inclusive ones, then just set one up, and you can just do a day-long one. You know, I did a women's one that was a Friday evening and a Saturday, so that women with kids wouldn't feel guilty abandoning their children. And we did it at UE, the local uni, and they funded a creche. So there were 3 or 4 women who came along who wouldn't have come otherwise because they had small children, who went into the creche and had a great time. And it can be a very short thing, because to me, it's not about the product you have at the end. It's always about the process you go through to get there, really.
I agree, in the learning that you've done. So I think we've had a good few comments, just game jams are kind of the future. And another couple from Angela about maybe stats where you could maybe look. So what she's saying, you could instead look at parents and target with young children. Google Ad does have an option like that. So I guess these are other options, but wish you all the luck in the future, and I hope that you do find a publisher, Constance, because I think it's a great thing to bring the generations together as well, and it's such a fab looking game. Thank you. Well, it's been a really nice team of people to work with. I just don't feel as though I can get them to do anything for free, really. I wish I could, but thank you.